The story of maternal milk is one of the oldest stories in the world. It's a narrative written not in books, but in our very biology, a tradition passed down through millions of years of evolution. This isn't just about food, it's about survival, connection, and the very foundation of human society. For most of our history, there was no alternative. A baby's life depended entirely on this liquid gold, and the way societies handled this fundamental need shaped everything from family structures to social hierarchies. Let's travel back in time, way back. Before cities, before agriculture, even before Homo sapiens. Our earliest mammalian ancestors, tiny shrew-like creatures scurrying under the feet of dinosaurs, developed a remarkable innovation: glands that secreted a nutrient-rich fluid to feed their young. This was the birth of milk. This single evolutionary leap gave mammals a massive advantage. Unlike reptiles or birds who had to leave their eggs vulnerable, mammals could carry their young and provide a constant, perfect food source. This allowed for longer periods of development, bigger brains, and a powerful bond between mother and child. Fast forward to early humans, for our hunter-gatherer ancestors, breastfeeding was non-negotiable. It was the only way to nourish an infant. But it wasn't just a mother's job. The entire community was involved. If a mother couldn't produce enough milk or tragically passed away, another woman in the tribe, a sister, an aunt, or a neighbor, would step in. This was the birth of wet nursing, not as a profession, but as a communal act of survival. In these small, tight-knit groups, the phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child," was a literal daily reality. A baby belonged to the group, and its survival was everyone's responsibility. This practice also had a fascinating side effect on population control. Breastfeeding naturally suppresses ovulation, spacing out births, and ensuring each child received enough care and resources before a new sibling arrived. As humans settled down and agriculture began, everything changed. Populations boomed. For the first time, people had a surplus of food, but also a new kind of social structure. In ancient civilizations like Egypt and Rome, society became more stratified. For the wealthy elite, breastfeeding became complicated. It was still seen as vital, but it was also considered a task for the lower classes. A noble woman's time was valuable. She had social duties, and prolonged breastfeeding could interfere with producing more heirs quickly. So, the practice of wet nursing transformed from a communal act of support into a formal, paid profession. Finding a good wet nurse became a critical task for affluent families. These women were carefully selected. They had to be healthy, well-fed, and of good character. People believed that a wet nurse's qualities, both physical and moral, could be passed to the baby through her milk. A papyrus from ancient Egypt details a contract for a wet nurse, specifying her diet, her duties, and the severe penalties if she failed to care for the child. In Rome, the law even recognized the rights of the infant to its wet nurse's milk. The bond was so strong that wet nurses were often considered part of the family, raising children who would one day become emperors and philosophers. But for the wet nurse herself, it was often a heart-wrenching trade-off. To feed another woman's child, she often had to give up her own, either sending it to a less qualified nurse or weaning it early with potentially tragic consequences. This was the hidden cost of a system built on inequality. For centuries, this was the norm. If you were wealthy, you hired a wet nurse. If you were poor, you breastfed your own child or relied on the charity of a neighbor. But what if neither was an option? This is where things get grim. For abandoned infants or those whose mothers couldn't nurse, the alternatives were terrifying. Animal milk was an option, but it was risky. Cows' or goats' milk is very different from human milk, harder for a baby to digest, and without sterilization, it was often teeming with deadly bacteria. People tried mixing it with water, honey, or bread to make it more suitable, creating a substance called pap. But these early formulas were a poor substitute, and infant mortality rates were staggeringly high. Feeding devices from this era, like clay or pewter pots with spouts, have been found by archaeologists. They looked more like tiny, strange teapots, and they were incredibly difficult to clean, making them perfect breeding grounds for disease. Then came the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries. This period of immense technological change also brought massive social upheaval. Families moved from farms to crowded, unsanitary cities. For the first time, large numbers of women began working outside the home in factories. This created a crisis. How could a mother work a 12-hour shift and still breastfeed her child? The old system of community support had broken down in the anonymity of the city. Wet nursing was too expensive for the working class. This desperate need for an alternative spurred a scientific revolution in infant feeding. Chemists and doctors began to seriously analyze milk. In 1865, the German chemist Justus von Liebig developed the first commercial infant formula. It was a powder made of cow's milk, wheat flour, malt flour, and potassium bicarbonate. He marketed it as a perfect food for infants. This was a game changer. Suddenly, there was a shelf-stable, scientific-seeming alternative to breast milk. Other formulas quickly followed, and a massive new industry was born. The marketing was brilliant and aggressive. Advertisements from the early 20th century praised formula as the modern, scientific, and civilized way to feed a baby. They featured chubby, healthy-looking babies and testimonials from doctors. Breastfeeding, in contrast, was subtly framed as old-fashioned, unreliable, even a bit primitive. The message was clear. Science knew best. The convenience was undeniable. Anyone could mix a bottle, freeing mothers from the biological tie of breastfeeding. This appealed not just to working mothers, but to a society that was increasingly valuing scientific authority over natural tradition. The baby bottle itself was perfected with the invention of rubber nipples, making feeding easier and more hygienic than the old clay pots. This shift had profound consequences. For the first time in human history, breastfeeding rates plummeted across the developed world. By the mid-20th century, in countries like the United States, feeding a baby with a bottle of formula was the new normal. Doctors and hospitals routinely gave new mothers formula samples. The ancient knowledge of how to breastfeed, once passed down through generations of women, was being lost. New mothers who wanted to breastfeed often found they had no support. Their own mothers had used formula, and doctors and nurses were often more familiar with bottle feeding than with helping a mother establish a good latch. It seemed like the story of maternal milk was coming to an end, replaced by the triumph of technology. But then, in the 1970s and 80s, the pendulum began to swing back. A growing body of scientific research started to reveal what we were losing. Scientists discovered that breast milk wasn't just food, it was a living, dynamic substance. It contains not just the perfect balance of fats, proteins, and carbs, but also thousands of unique components that cannot be replicated in a lab. It's packed with antibodies that protect a baby from illness, hormones that regulate development, and even stem cells. The composition of milk changes from day to day, even during a single feeding, to meet the baby's specific needs. It's personalized medicine and nutrition in one. This new scientific understanding fueled a grassroots movement. Groups of mothers began forming to support each other and share knowledge about breastfeeding, reviving the ancient tradition of communal support in a modern context. Organizations like La Leche League were founded, providing mother-to-mother counseling and fighting to reclaim breastfeeding as a normal and valuable practice. Public health organizations like the World Health Organization and UNICEF launched global campaigns highlighting the immense health benefits for both mother and child. They exposed the aggressive marketing tactics of formula companies, especially in developing countries where a lack of clean water made formula feeding particularly dangerous. Today, we're in a new chapter of this long story. The breast is best message is widespread, and breastfeeding rates are rising again in many parts of the world. But it's not a simple return to the past. The conversation is now more nuanced. We recognize the incredible benefits of maternal milk, but we also acknowledge the real challenges mothers face. Lack of paid parental leave, unsupportive workplaces, and social stigma can make breastfeeding incredibly difficult. The pressure to breastfeed can also lead to guilt and anxiety for mothers who are unable to or choose not to for a variety of valid reasons. The modern world is trying to find a balance. We have safe, high-quality formula as a reliable alternative, something our ancestors could only dream of. We have breast pumps that allow mothers to provide their milk even when they are away from their babies. We have milk banks, the modern, sterile, and anonymous version of wet nursing, providing donor milk for premature and fragile infants. We're seeing more legal protections for nursing mothers and a greater cultural acceptance of breastfeeding in public. The history of maternal milk is a mirror reflecting our own social evolution. It's a story of biology versus technology, of community versus individuality, and of tradition versus modernity. It reminds us that something as natural and fundamental as feeding a baby is never simple. It's shaped by culture, economics, and science. The journey from a shared community resource to a commercial product and back to a celebrated natural process shows just how much our values and knowledge can change. This story is still being written with every mother and every baby. In a world that is finally beginning to understand the profound and timeless power of this liquid gold. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of things. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the objects and ideas that shape our world. We'll see you next time.